Hello everyone, and welcome to WriterSpeak, dedicated to the written word and those who produce it. I am your host, Jeane Slone, the author of 3 historical fictions, She Flew Bombers, She Built Ships During World War II, and She Was an American Spy. Today in the studio, I would like to welcome William Joseph Bryan. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
It's nice having you. And I would like to tell our audience a little bit about you, that you are the author of 3 books that we have here, pretty prolific author, and that you studied music at Juilliard School of Music. You received the Fulbright Scholarship to the Conservatoire National in Paris. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. Bill received his master's degree from the University of Southern California, and he is Emeritus Professor of Music at Foothill College in Los Altos Hills, where he taught music history, appreciation, and piano for 28 years.
That's right. I did 4 years of high school teaching before that also. So I did more teaching than just the 28 years at Foothill. But that's my pinnacle, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, tell us about the beginning. How did you come to start to play the piano?
I was at a neighbor's house when I was about 6 years old, and they had a circus piano, not a full-size piano, but a circus piano that was very brightly painted.
Wow.
And I liked the tinkling sound. So when I look back, I don't know whether it was the tinkling sound or the painted piano that made me interested. In any case, I went home and demanded a piano, and that's how I began, and I found a teacher. Fortunately, she had studied at the New England Conservatory of Music, one of the fine music schools. And of course, I didn't know anything about that when as a child, but it was authentic training anyway to begin with. And I was the usual student of not wanting to particularly practice, but once I began getting some rather showy pieces and playing them in school assemblies, I realized it was kind of a fun thing to do. So I kept at it.
How fortunate for you that your parents provided you with that education.
Well, yes. My brother was destined to be a doctor because our family sort of patriarch had been a doctor, and my father was determined that his oldest son, my older brother, was going to be a doctor. So they didn't care what I did, just so long they had a doctor in the family. So that wasn't going to be me.
Oh, that's funny. Well, let's talk about your first book,
All right.
Fairy Pudding. And it won a Best Biographical Award in 2001 from the San Diego Book Awards Association.
That's right.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I have a house, I had a house in the desert of San Diego. People don't realize that San Diego, they think of it as only on the Pacific Ocean, but it goes all the way to the desert and down to the border of Mexico. So it isn't that far from being in Baja California, in fact. But I wintered there every year since '93, and as a matter of fact, I built a house, but the house that I had by the time I wrote this book was another house that had a swimming pool, which was very nice. And so the book was conceived there, so I considered myself eligible to be a San Diego author. It was limited to people that lived in San Diego County.
Oh, I see. Well, I found this book that you displayed a very clever sense of humor.
Well, thank you. The story actually is my life and my career as a musician and a teacher. But what I'm actually the most proud of, in a sense, is, of course, I don't think one can be necessarily proud of his life, but proud of what I did in regards to articles that I wrote or lectures that I made. And the very first, and that comprises the appendix. As a matter of fact, I write on the back of the cover that the chapters are the story of my life, but the appendices are my reason for being. And the first appendix is the lecture that I gave for the first homophile organization in America. As a matter of fact, it was organized in the mid-50s in Los Angeles. And I proposed this concert lecture called Music, the Hermaphroditic Art. And that comprises the first appendix of this book. So in a sense, it really is a statement of my life, beliefs, more than just the story of my life.
I was very surprised to see the appendix, and it is over 30 pages.
Well, I had a lot to say.
Yeah, that was really different to see an appendix like that. It made it very interesting. It would be nice to talk about your next book. The
dog book.
Right. The 392 Dog Years and Counting.
Right.
It's a great title.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And Counting is the dog that is not with me now, but he's still alive, and he's lived with my nephew.
Oh.
The reason that he's not with me is because of having medical problems, and my nephew came and helped take care of me, and the two bonded so well. And because I was in basically nursing homes for a while, and places where I couldn't have the dog be free like I like to have dogs be free, it was better for him to stay with my nephew. So Rex is his name, and Rex is still alive in Michigan with my nephew.
And that's the counting part.
And that's the counting part, exactly.
Yeah.
And he is still very, my nephew sends me emails frequently and ends with signing his name and Wolf. Meaning a little bark from Rex. Rex is a very sweet,
cute.
very sweet dog, very understanding dog. He knew when I was sick and lay right next to me for 12 hours at a time, just keeping me, being a companion to me. He was very sensitive that way and very helpful also.
Well, I found this to be a very original memoir in that you weave the story of your life with your dogs, with your extraordinary dogs.
That's right.
It makes for a very nice tale.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
The biggest chapter in that book is about Alfie, sort of the middle dog in terms of my having dogs, because he was really happy in water. And I had a place up in Shelter Cove, which is north of Santa Rosa here, and he adored the ocean. We had our different stations that we went every day that we were up there to play, and he was a great play dog. Then when he passed away, the next dog wasn't interested in water at all. So it's interesting, the different personalities of the dog.
They have different personalities,
That's
just
right.
like we have
That's
different
right.
personalities.
That's right.
And that's what made it very interesting
Yes.
for you to focus on dogs, but then your memoir crept in between them. It seemed to me like you must have done a lot of research, because you moved around a lot, and in your book you would tell a little history about where you lived.
Well, like the Shelter Cove, that's a very unique place. It's called the Lost Coast because it's, first of all, hard to get to, and there's a national forest that goes right down to the edge of the ocean, which is quite fantastic because usually you don't see nature, so to speak. Beaches, yes, but trees going right into the ocean line was fantastic, and that was the view that I had from the house there. So discussing the acquiring of the lot and then the building of the cedar house, I thought with Alfie there all the time, it was made such an interesting happening because we were doing something quite original out in the nature. And I love, of course, I grew up in rather natural surroundings in the first place.
Well, all the places you lived, you seem to give a little history of them.
Well,
that made it pretty fascinating, really.
Good.
Because you really did move quite a lot.
Well, they were always because of circumstance and need. My first house, the very first house I bought was in Los Gatos when I was teaching, early teaching at Foothill. And it was a wonderful place because it was on the edge of a ravine of oaks. The name of the little cul-de-sac was called Valley Oak Drive. And I was the lucky one that lived actually on the valley, so to speak. So I was surrounded by nature, and I liked that. I had grown up in that. Then, in the end of the 70s, when this whole, inflation was terrible, interest rates, second mortgage was 17%, that sort of thing. This business of wanting to go back to nature, and I felt this need of getting to some place where I could grow my own vegetables and everything. And that's what I did by moving to Healdsburg. And that was a wonderful 20 years because I grew my own vegetables. I canned fruit, I canned tomatoes.
And you dabbled in making wine.
Oh, yes, I dabbled in making wine because I lived right at the edge of a vineyard. My neighbors taught me how to make wine. And of course, I enjoy drinking wine. And
when I was reading about that part, I found it interesting that one of the most important things is cleanliness.
That's right, that's right. And if you go into a winery, take a winery tour, you see that there's hoses everywhere. Usually the floor is damp because they've been hosing down. Because if an insect, there's what they call a wine gnat. And if a wine gnat gets into the wine, it destroys the wine. That's why wineries are so adamant about cleanliness. And you'll notice that if you go into any winery and go into where the wine is actually made or stored. That's the very upper, and they have even light sort of things that will kill insects, or not lights, but they look like light fixtures. Anything to keep the wine gnat away is essential in making wine. When you do your home wine making and you're during the actual fermentation, you keep a sheet over the tub or whatever you're using to ferment the wine, because you don't want anything to get into that wine. But you still need to have it breathe a little bit. So it can breathe through a sort of a gauze-like sheet, but a gnat can't get into it. That's the point.
Oh, well, that is fascinating. Another really funny part I found in your dog book, one of your extraordinary dogs would poke his head and try to get you to stop playing.
Oh, the piano, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, that was funny. I broke my leg. I lived in Texas during the winter for 4 seasons, and I broke my leg during an ice storm. So I wasn't able to play during that recuperation period. And then when I started to go back, it was Smokey at the time. Smokey hadn't been hearing the piano being played. He went and took his head and literally lifted my arm off the piano. And I wasn't feeling that well still. And I thought, oh, what the heck? If I can't play the piano around Smokey, I'll start writing a book. And that's when I began Fairy Pudding.
Oh, that was
really
so interesting that a dog would get you to stop playing.
Well, and Alfie before used to sit underneath the piano while I practiced. So temperaments of dogs are different. One dog liked the music and the other one didn't.
Yeah, It's the different personalities.
Or
again.
maybe he didn't want me caressing the piano. He wanted me to caress him. Well, you don't know, you know. But
Yeah.
in fact, he did lift my arm several times, not just once.
Huh.
Well, I'm going to write something because that won't make any sound, won't bother him. And that's when I began the fairy pudding.
Uh-huh. Well, we would love to hear you read a piece.
Well, this part from Fairy Pudding, the first book, is about a lecture that I gave for One. That was the organization, the homophile organization in Los Angeles. And this is not so much about One as it is about creation itself. And now to the art of music, the hermaphroditic art. Erich Fromm tells us in his essay for Happiness, The Art of Loving, that the awareness of human separation without reunion by love is the source of shame. It is at the same time the source of guilt and anxiety. The deepest need of man, he says, is the need to overcome his separateness, to leave the prison of his aloneness. That's the end of quote. Gertrude Stein on her deathbed asked, "What is the answer?" There was silence. "Well then, what is the question?" she asked, and supposedly died. Fromm says that man of all ages and cultures is confronted with the solution of one and the same question, the question of how to overcome separateness, how to achieve union, how to transcend one's own individual life and find at-one-ment. He goes on to say that the more the human race emerged from its primary bonds, the more it separated itself from the natural world, and then the more intense became the need to find new ways of escaping separateness. One way of achieving this aim lies in all kinds of orgiastic states. According to Fromm, all forms of orgiastic union have three characteristics. They are intense, even violent. They occur in the total personality, in mind and body. They are transitory and periodical. The most satisfactory way of escaping separateness is through love, which Fromm describes as an active, not a passive effect. The active character of love can be described by stating that love is primarily giving, not receiving. Giving is the highest expression of potency. In the very act of giving, we experience our strength, our wealth, our power. This experience of heightened vitality and potency fills us with joy. We experience ourselves as overflowing, spending, alive, hence joyous. A contemporary composer, Ned Rorem, says that history has provided 10,000 solutions to Gertrude Stein's "What is the answer?" but that those responses only raise other questions. He feels that only the work of art satisfies, for its questions and answers are mutually inclusive and form the one finished thing that exists. The hermaphrodism inherent in this mutually inclusive asking and answering is in no art more apparent than in music. I hope to show in the music I play today the orgiastic analogy of intensity, even violence, and the occupation of the total personality which most composers bring to their music. That this act of creation, for them, contains the three characteristics of an orgiastic state. It will be apparent in the act of their creation. Giving is total and therefore becomes the highest expression of potency. The repetition of creation throughout a lifetime embodies the third orgiastic characteristic of transience and periodicity, yet each time contains that element of finish, asked and answered, which is often lacking in human affairs. Through sound, a physical component of nature, the composer for a time relinquishes aloneness and separateness and joins nature in one of her dynamic mediums.
That's interesting to think about how sexual orgasms can be like playing a piano.
Well, it isn't. It is that sense of overcoming separateness. It doesn't need to be sexual in order to do that. When you think of the great composers like Chopin and Bach and Beethoven, of course, all of these composers, the idea that they can compose over a whole lifetime, that's the business of repetition and periodicity, that from notes as being a form of one of the forms of the orgiastic state. Anyway, I was very much influenced by that thought and bringing it to music.
Very fascinating. Yeah.
Let's talk about this third book before we
I'm ready to talk about The Moment to Remember. Well, would you call this a sexual memoir or erotica?
Yes, I would. I'll be perfectly honest.
I thought it probably was. And who would you say your target audience is?
Well, it's obviously an LGBT audience, and I would assume specifically gay men. But I have moved to the new Fountain Grove Lodge, which is LGBT oriented.
Yeah.
And I'm finding that the lesbians there are very interested in what I've written and who we are and so forth. It's like it's brother and sisterhood for sure. And I was a little surprised by that and pleased.
Yeah. Well, that is fascinating. You were one of the first people to move
I
there.
was the very first one on the first day it opened at 8 o'clock in the morning. My movers pushed me that. As a matter of fact, they were right behind me when I came up the road. I told them not to come before 9, but they were there at 8. So yes, I was the first person to move into the lodge. It's a wonderful building. It's beautifully built.
I was wondering what reactions that you got from this very openly gay book, and that is fascinating, that of what you just said, that gay women are very open to reading a book about gay men.
Well, to be perfectly honest, the person that published this through her Purple Press is a lesbian. And when I sent the material to her, I hope I can use this word, because I'm quoting her. She said, "I enjoyed your stories even for this old dyke." Quote, unquote.
Yeah.
And I didn't make it up, and I was very pleased. She enjoyed the stories, and they were published almost immediately. It's actually published through Amazon. She does her business with them and under the Purple Press name, but Amazon is the one that actually produces the book.
It's also really quite a travelogue.
Well, yes, that's correct. My sabbatical diary is there in total, with all the personal things that took place, which I could not publish in anything else but a gay book. It had to be published that way if it was going to be published in total, which I wanted to do.
Of all your travels, what country would you say is your very favorite? And you've been in probably, you can't even count how many
There are so many
countries.
of them. Of course, from a sexual point of view, Thailand was very lovely and fun and so forth. But my favorite country probably was Egypt, in fact. And it's hard to reconcile that with what's happening right today, but when I was there in 1975, it was very open to Americans. They loved Americans. It's a lovely place to be. and it was the right temperature. It was in April, and it was just a lovely feeling. And I discovered that Europeans at that time, that's their favorite place to go during the winter, because it's like escaping to Florida is for us, or to Hawaii, or something like that. For them, it's going to the tropics. It's a lovely country. It's a beautiful country, and of course, historically, to see the pyramids and to go to Luxor and see the fantastic remnants there of the civilization. It's astonishing.
And of the 3 books, you call this book, The Moment to Remember, your naughty book.
My naughty book. Well, it's because it tells the story of my other life, not my musical life, but my sexual existence.
Yeah, it's very candid and graphic.
Good.
Well, there you go.
The name, The Moment to Remember, comes from a poem that I wrote actually 50 years ago, at least 50 years ago, when I was a young man. And it was the inspiration for putting all of these stories together, finally, into this book. I thought, we're going to put the diary together and the stories that I've written over my lifetime, and then the opening is written currently, is fresh. But the poem itself comes from a very early age. I was in my mid-20s when I wrote this.
We would love to hear that poem.
Can I read
It's very
that?
beautiful.
It's the end of the book. I thought that I'd like to keep it as a surprise for people who read the book, but I've changed my mind, and I feel like it ought to be presented, so to speak.
Yes, it's a very lovely poem.
And here it is. It's a prose poem. The moment to remember is when he holds you for one instant tenderly. After savage excitement has generated lust into madness, there is tenderness and need. He has needed savageness, abandonment, loss of identity, but for this moment he needs not an act in itself, but our personal act of love together. And for this moment, the flow and rhythm stop as he gives up the flight of love and embraces the communion of love. Holding me apart gently for this instant of real togetherness, he whispers my name and identifies me as his need in this otherwise universal moment.
Very lovely. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Well, Bill, you are quite a prolific writer. You have written 3 books, but tell me, are you actually working on another book?
Yes, I am. It's called Nervana,
Oh,
as
funny.
in nervous. When I was a Boy Scout, some bad things happened, and that began the nervous tension that perhaps went in. The book is talking about things like that occurred in my life. So it's another aspect of my life which I have not written about in these previous books, and it seems like I've got more to say, so there's going to be a 4th book.
Might as well.
Right.
Yeah, well, that's great. And where can we buy these 3 wonderful
These books are all available at Amazon. If you put in my full name, William Joseph Bryan, you'll come right up right away with the pictures of these books. There might be another one in there because my uncle Joseph has a biography about him, and they've got that mixed in with my books, but it isn't one of my books, but that's how it works. That's why you have to put the whole name in, because then you'll get these 3 books, pictures of these. So it's easy to find them because they do show the pictures of the covers.
Oh, good.
And there they are.
And the audience will see them on the credits.
That's correct. Oh, yeah, right.
Yes.
Good.
So your name will be real obvious on there, and we
good.
also include the covers. in the credits. So
Good.
for the audience.
Well,
Well, it has been quite a pleasure to interview you, Bill.
Thank you, Jeane.
I'm so glad to have you on the show.
Thank you.
WriterSpeak is produced at C Media Labs in Santa Rosa. And we would like to thank our sponsor, the Sonoma County Gazette. Please join us next time for another exciting episode of WriterSpeak.